what I think conventional medicine is missing when trying to address a lot of these complex illnesses like Lyme disease, like autoimmune conditions, like addiction, like depression even, is they're missing the importance of the psychospiritual element and influence on the physical neurology and what the consequences of that are on the rest of the body, such as the vagal nerve and all the organs that are connected to the nervous system, the enteric nervous system, which is all the neurons that live in our digestive tract, the immune function, etc. So I find Kambo to be very holistic in addressing all of these facets of health simultaneously.
What is up, and welcome to the Afterlife Insurance Podcast. Today's episode is a good one. I interview Caitlin Thompson, who is an international Kambo practitioner and bona fide Kambo expert. Caitlin has quite a background, including formal scientific training as a neurobiologist and a research associate through the UCSD School of Medicine. She's also quite the world traveler and works closely with indigenous communities in the Amazon who are stewards of the Kambo medicine. In this interview, we talk all things Kambo, from what it actually is, how it's used traditionally, and the environmental and sustainability issues that have arisen because of the result in its boom in popularity. Now, this medicine is not to be taken lightly, and I'm super grateful to Caitlin for coming on and sharing her wealth of knowledge around this medicine. She has an abundance of resources available at her website, medicinefrogkambo.com. So if you're at all interested in working with this medicine, check out her stuff because she is the real deal. So without any further ado, let's get into it. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Afterlife Insurance Podcast. Today I have the very special pleasure of talking to Caitlin Thompson. I met Caitlin online a while back, and we have some mutual connections, I believe. And for a while, we've been trading messages back and forth, and I just knew that I had to get her on the podcast and have a conversation with her because she's a really fascinating individual. We share a background in being trained in a clinical science kind of a way. Most people don't know this about me, but I went to college for microbiology and chemistry, and it's not something I do anymore, but Caitlin also has a background in scientific research. And now she's, from what I understand, transitioned more into working with plant medicines and specifically Kambo. And I'd love to have a conversation on your take on Kambo, and I'd love to hear your story about how you made the transition from research to going to the jungle and living in Bali and being a world adventurer. So welcome, Caitlin, and it's nice to have you on.
Thank you. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to finally get this opportunity to have a conversation with you in real time. So really appreciate the honor of that. Yeah, okay, where do I start? So yeah, my academic training is in neurobiology, but I've went a very unconventional route from the start. I never really truly got plugged into the scientific workforce. So I did some research in my undergrad in a lab and things like that, but a lot of my experience in research has been in very obscure opportunities that I took. For example, being connected with people that were running studies at UCSD and then volunteering to help them run their studies, or actually forging scientific research on my own by collaborating with people that did have the credentials and using data from my Kambo practices, etc. And actually a lot of the research I've published has been while I'm living in Bali, writing my manuscript with a volcano and rice field view in front of me. So from the beginning, I've taken a very different route with science, but for me, science was never so much about pursuing a career. It was more about really being passionate about the study of divinity. And I know that's a bit odd for a lot of scientists to have such deep spirituality, but for me, science was a way of connecting to God or the universe or consciousness or whatever word you want to use, because I found it all so brilliantly intelligent. So, excuse me, I did a little frog medicine yesterday, so I got frog in my throat still. So my journey with Kambo was pretty unexpected. In my early adulthood, I was exploring with a lot of different psychedelic and entheogenic substances. I was in the rave scene when I was 18, and then I found my way to the Burning Man scene. And then by the time I was 21, in 2011, I was already in Peru in the Amazon drinking ayahuasca. So I had a very early start, which was great because I just skipped the whole binge drinking part of college. And it was actually through my ayahuasca community that I came into my relationship with Kambo, which is not surprising. I had heard about Kambo in the jungle in 2011 when I went for that first ayahuasca retreat. And someone had described it to me, and I thought, well, that sounds stupid. Why the hell would anyone do that? That sounds like some dumb shit that only the natives would do. And I didn't give it much thought, though I actually did go home after that trip and just did a brief Google search and was surprised to find some of Vittorio Espremer's original research where he was actually talking about some of the peptides that he isolated from this secretion of this frog. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Someone's actually looked into this. And then I didn't give it much thought until probably 6 years later, a friend of mine, maybe you know him actually, his name previously was Edward, now he goes by Micaiah. He's also very influential in the Kambo space at this point, but he came over and had told me a little bit about his personal growth using Kambo as a medicine. And he was the first person who actually told me anything good about it. And I'm like, oh. So I became intrigued, of course. And I was in a very exploratory time of my life. And this was in, I think, 2015. And I said, take me with you to the next one. So he did. And we went to this ceremony 3 hours away. And I really had no expectations. I didn't know what I was getting into. I hadn't really read or heard a lot about it because this was at a time when Kambo wasn't really popular yet. There wasn't a lot of people that had experience working with it. There wasn't a lot of information on it. It was very underground, very fringe. I mean, it still is, but even more so then. So ended up having this really profound process with it, which was unexpected. And this was at a time in my life where I was just starting to clue in and realize that I had been chronically ill my whole life. I had been born essentially with chronic illness. And because I had no contrast of experiencing health and vitality, I didn't realize how sick I was. And it was in me starting to explore with things like dabbling with my nutrition and different supplements and things like that, and Kambo, that I actually started to accidentally get better. And it was in this increase in my health and vitality baseline where I was seeing more and more that the way I had been existing was not normal. It was not normal to be in my early 20s and needing to sleep 13 hours a day and exhausted all the time and be in pain all the time when you're sitting in a movie for 2 hours, etc. So from the beginning, I knew something wasn't right. And Kambo showed me by healing me that there was a better life that was possible, a more vital life with more energy, more joy, more neurological balance, etc. And later I did earn these diagnostic titles that kind of explained it, but they're largely just labels that describe someone who had massive dysfunction in their neurology, their immunology, and their system as a whole. But things like Lyme disease and other infections of the nervous system and the gastrointestinal system, so like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, different dysbiotic infections in the gut, food allergies, fibromyalgia, ankylosing spondylitis, some of these joint and muscle related autoimmune afflictions, chronic fatigue, etc., PTSD, things like that. So Kambo actually showed me that it was even possible to live pain free. And I started self administering first and continuing my relationship with this medicine because it had me very intrigued from the beginning and was creating such a profound progression in this healing process that I didn't even really understand fully or realize that I needed to be on. And then like my roommate or whatever would be like, "Well, can I try it?" And I'm like, "I guess so." Then I administer to her, and then like a friend would ask, and then a friend of a friend would ask. And next thing I knew, I was serving strangers with no training whatsoever. Don't do it like me, folks. Like, learn from my mistakes, please. Because a lot of people do this. They think, how hard could it be? And the truth is, you don't know what you don't know, including myself. I was ignorant. So, after about, gosh, 100 administrations of other people, I realized that this role of practitioner had really fallen into my lap. And it wasn't something that I like saw out or looked for, but I realized that whether I liked it or not, this was a calling that was happening. And then I realized it's really important for me to get formal training. So, did a formal certification training, and when I emerged from that training, I mean, immediately it just exploded and it never slowed down. And for the next 4 years, I think I was serving probably about 400 times a year. It was bananas. And I'm grateful for those times of just massive experience, but it burnt me out quite a bit. And in the last few years, I've had the chance to step more into leadership and teaching and really sharing the wisdom that I've acquired from having such tremendous experience, and also in that time being able to really forge the entire field of Kambo scientific research, because there's not really anything going on in that. And there's this false understanding that, oh, there's so much science on Kambo. That's actually not true. There's very little science, and it's mostly on these isolated peptides from like 20, 30 years ago. And there's not that much investigation into Kambo as a whole experience, with the cocktail of peptides being taken by humans through transdermal burn application. So, this is very important because I see a lot of claims being made about the scientific proof of Kambo by people that are not scientifically literate enough to understand that you cannot translate those assumptions to reality. So, anyways, that's my intro. Kind of went off on a bit of a TED Talk tangent there.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. That's really powerful. And I've met several people on my journey who have worked with Kambo who were very ill, specifically a couple of women with Lyme's disease. And I know Lyme's disease is notorious for being difficult to diagnose and difficult to treat, or to find treatments that actually provide meaningful results. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about your experience. But before we continue, can you please give a quick description for people who may not be familiar with Kambo, what the medicine is, where it comes from, how it's procured? It's a very unique and interesting substance. And yeah, if you could give a brief overview of the cycle from the frog to administration, and maybe even talk a little bit about the Kambo ceremony or being administered Kambo, what that entails.
Sure. So, Kambo is a traditional Amazonian medicine that is typically administered through superficial burns made on the skin, usually like the upper arm or leg. And this substance actually is the skin secretion from a very specific type of tree frog. The species is Phylomedusa bicolor. And this frog secretes this substance as a defense mechanism, not only against predators, but also against microbes, because it contains all these antimicrobial substances. And then this secretion is applied to these superficial burns and then rapidly goes into the lymphatic system in the bloodstream, where it then binds to receptors of the body and affects different organs to produce this really intense physiological response in the human body that can include elevated heart rate, heat flushing, facial swelling, which I have a little bit of still going on from yesterday, sweating, mucus secretion, and then of course what Kambo is famous for is like nausea and purging through vomiting or diarrhea, etc. So it does produce this pretty short-lived but very intense and usually uncomfortable physical experience Now, it's not a hallucinogenic substance. This is not a psychedelic, so it doesn't inebriate people's mental capacity in quite the same way, though it does have its own unique mind expansive properties to it that are really hard to describe to someone who's never experienced them. It's very bizarre, and it seems to be quantumly entangled with space time in a way that doesn't make a lot of rational sense. And so it is part of the magic of this medicine. And this medicine traditionally was used for hunting magic. Contrary to a lot of popular belief, there was some application for like physical ailments and stuff like that, traditionally speaking, but it's largely been used for magic and improving like luck and abilities to hunt more effectively or prepare oneself to go into even like violent warfare, because the people that steward Kambo, they do have a very tumultuous, violent past, and it's important to keep that in mind. But yeah, it's this really strange phenomena that on paper it sounds really awful and bad and violent and probably toxic and dangerous, but it is remarkably safe. It's remarkably benevolent. And contrary to popular belief, the the peptides themselves of Kambo's secretion are actually relatively non toxic to human cells and organ systems, to our knowledge so far. Again, we might discover later on that there's some things that we learn, but they seem to be very non toxic and metabolized quickly and well tolerated, with a tremendous amount of potential medical applications and health benefits to human physiology. So, while people think that the vomiting response is due to this poisoning result in the body, that's actually not true. These vomiting and physiological outcomes are a response to the mechanisms of the peptides themselves interacting with things like the gallbladder or pancreas or smooth muscle contraction. And so that's a common misconception, is that your body's responding to this toxic poisonous event. It's actually just responding to the pharmacology of how the peptides themselves are binding to these specific receptors and organ systems.
In my experience, it always feels like I'm dying for a short period of time. And when you say that it's a response to the peptides and it's a pharmacological sort of reaction that your internal body chemistry is having to this exogenous thing that's being introduced into your body through that burn in the skin, I'm having a hard time connecting those two. Because so the peptides, the secretion, I've heard it called a poison, I've heard it called a venom, I've heard it called different things. Well, what is it technically? And I know you said that it's got antimicrobial properties and it's a defense mechanism for the frog specifically. But I'm trying to make this connection in my mind. Like, how is this not an experience of being poisoned? Because that's, and maybe it's my own ignorance, or maybe it's my own projection, what I'm putting on the experience. But yeah, I'm just curious about that, because that's always been my sentiment around it. Like, I feel like I'm being poisoned, and
Yeah.
not that the result is a bad thing, but because afterwards I always feel refreshed and like my body is rejuvenated in a way.
Hmm.
And at the same time, I can't deny the fact that, like, on some level, I feel like I've just survived a really almost near bodily death experience.
Yeah, totally. And trust me, I have gone down some rabbit holes to really tease apart what does it mean for something to be poisonous? What does it mean for something to be toxic? And the philosophies around toxicity, right? So bear with me here on the nuance. So, first, the technical terminology is somewhat contingent upon what field of study you're actually interacting with. So, for example, poison from the context of like a toxicology perspective is going to have a different definition than a poison from an ecological or organismal biology perspective. For example, a poison, according to an ecologist, would be some sort of passively administered substance that deters predation, such as a secretion that a frog would make so that something doesn't eat it. Whereas a venom, for example, requires some active administration of something through a specialized organ or structure, such as a fang, for example. So typically, snakes are called venomous because they usually are, it's like an offensive choice for them to specifically attack their prey or whatever, or perhaps it's in self defense as well, through a fang. Whereas a frog is like, if you eat me, I will fuck you up, right? And also, toxicity is also contingent upon the organism itself. Obviously, there's things in Kambo that are toxic to bacteria, to viruses, to fungi, but not necessarily to mammals. And there's probably a different level of toxicity to something like a snake, which is going to be a natural predator of a frog, and they're going to be affected differently. Now, I haven't seen any reports of other animals actually being killed from trying to consume Kambo or the frogs that carry it, but I imagine that there might be more toxicity to something like a reptile. But one thing that's also interesting too is that it seems like the Kambo secretion, it doesn't deter predation necessarily by killing the predator. It actually, some of these opioid peptides in the secretion will cause uncontrollable yawning. And so if a snake has a hold of a frog and they're now having this parasympathetic response that's causing them to uncontrollably yawn, it's going to cause the snake's mouth to open and allow the frog to escape, which I think is like such a great example of how polite and benevolent the essence of Kambo really is. It's like, so do no harm. It's like, excuse me, sir, I hate to bother you, but like, I'd really like if you don't eat me. Can we just open your mouth a little? Okay, thanks, bye. So it is amazing that even in that context of like self-defense, it is still such a kind and gentle and non-deadly, non-toxic way of moving through the world, to make sure that they are taken care of. So we have to think about like all of these different things about the context of like, what does it mean for something to be poisonous? And you can also look at like hormesis as an example. There's these toxic compounds in fruits and vegetables that are ultimately healthy for us. And the reason that they're healthy for us is that they're mildly toxic. Like a lot of these polyphenol antioxidant compounds that we deem to be healthy in like blueberries and kale and spinach and fruits and vegetables and stuff, they're actually mildly toxic, but it's this arms race against other organisms in evolution where they develop these toxic compounds to protect themselves from being eaten by animals. And then animals evolved to overcome these toxic compounds by responding epigenetically and upregulating things like glutathione or superoxide dismutase or other molecules in the body to combat the toxic effects of these molecules, ultimately overall leading to a higher state of health. And that's how something like a blueberry, which is technically a mildly poisonous food trying to protect itself, results in this increase of our health and vitality because of how our body responds to this toxic insult. So when you really start to think about this shit, you're like, oh, there really is no such thing as just blatant good or bad in this world. It's all related to the context, and it's all about how we respond to stress and challenge, because that is what actually makes us healthier and stronger, right? Even in our personal lives, the hard things we do, the challenging things we do, the exercise that we do makes us better because we're adaptive beings designed to interact and respond to our environment in order to survive and thrive.
So it's like a really hard exercise or hard workout for your immune system and just your physiological system as a whole. That makes sense.
At the
It's
least, it's very disruptive, and that disruption prompts the body to reconfigure where its homeostatic balance is.
yeah, that's a way to put it. In the least, it's disruptive. I can concur with that. Yeah. And quite frankly, though, a disruption is necessary from time to time. And that prompts your body to look for new ways of being. And that disruption could be what allows you to let go or purge certain toxins. The very first time I did Kambo, there's a gentleman who sat near me, and he had gotten a lot of really dark tattoos, a lot of really just dark, blacked out areas of his body. And the ink was not high quality. And it was his first time doing Kambo as well. And his purge was dark blue, greenish. And the woman, who was a very experienced Kambo practitioner, she looked at his bucket and she said, I've never seen anything quite like that. She said, I've seen people purge tattoo toxins, but like you had a lot of stuff in your system. And quite frankly, I'd never seen anything like that since. And I've sat in a lot of Kambo ceremonies, or quite a few over the last few years. So something like that, it's one of those things where under what other circumstance or disruption would the body have an opportunity to release that, or to break that loose and get rid of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the proposed mechanisms of how Kambo can detoxify someone, because that's a buzzword and that's a lot of what people ascribe the value of Kambo, even though it's so much more sophisticated than that. But bile is one of the body's innate detoxification methods, and the bile ends up becoming saturated with a lot of these non-polar ingredients, toxins, etc., that just get stuck and then recycled in the bile and then slowly discarded through the digestion. But having someone actually vomit bile out and then force the body to regenerate a fresh supply can be really valuable, because, like you've witnessed, the bile can be holding all these excess heavy metals and industrial solvents and probably like microplastics, things that are not excreted through urine and water soluble as easily. And so I do think that actually removing bile is a detoxification method, and similar purgative practices in Vedic traditions and yogic traditions and stuff like that, probably Chinese medicine as well, and certainly Amazonian medicine. They loved a good purge. So I do think there's ancient wisdom around vomiting out these old stomach secretions so that you can replenish. And that is also somewhat depleting because it does require energy to replenish and recreate those bile salts and things like that. So it's good to find the balance between like moving things out but not depleting ourselves, because there's no such thing as a free lunch, right? There's always a cost to any sort of benefit that we get.
Yeah, that's wild. I just had a light bulb moment. You helped me make a connection between those fluids in our body, how they might maintain or hold on to certain toxins, and getting rid of them in a purgative way, like vomiting, can allow you to clear those things out in a way that might otherwise take your body a long time to get rid of. When I was in India in my yoga teacher training, we had to swallow 3 feet of gauze, this cotton gauze. You make a little ball, swallow it down, and then 3 feet of it, you just like gulp it down your esophagus into your stomach. And then you had to let it sit there for 15 or 20 minutes. And then you pull it out, and it takes the lining of your stomach and some like the mucus and the things that just hold on to, like you said, different environmental toxins, things that are coming into your body. Like it just soaks it up, and I forget what the name of it was, but you pull it out. And it was something we did 3 times in that month. And in certain traditional yogic practices, they would do that on a regular basis just to get those toxins out. And it's doing the same thing in a lot of ways as Kambo. There's these very different wisdom traditions, and these very different cultures have similar sorts of mechanisms and practices that allow the people who practice them to clear toxins from their body and to live a more healthful life. So I think, wow, that I would have never made that connection, but that makes so much sense. And yeah, thinking about the different wisdom that these ancient traditions hold. And I guess what that leads me to is, I mentioned Lyme's disease earlier, and you said that working with Kambo has helped you to work through some chronic diseases and illnesses and maladies that you had and lived with, not realizing that it was necessarily even out of the ordinary until it was gone. And I think a lot of people probably experience that in one way or another throughout their life. Like, oh, I made this change and I feel much better. And I can't even believe that I was living that way for so long. Like, misery just became my normal. Because you've worked with so many people and have done trainings and are an advanced practitioner, I'm curious as to the scope of the sorts of illnesses that people have that you've seen Kambo help with. I know it's a very broad medicine and it can help with a lot of different things, but I'm just curious about some of your experiences and what you've seen as results of people working with Kambo.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the privilege of witnessing miracle after miracle. It seems like Kambo does have beneficial application for so many different things. And of course, I attract a lot of people with these chronic autoimmune or infection related diseases simply because of my background and understanding them. But I've also worked with people with cancer and addiction and depression and spiritual incongruence, whatever that means, trauma, chronic pain, metabolic diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, like all sorts of different things. And it just continues to amaze me how customized each person's experience is for them. And that's one of the merits of Kambo. I think it doesn't just like a pharmaceutical medication, it will push the body and the chemistry in one direction, right? That's its job. And so, unless you're like a master alchemist and you're using formulations, in my opinion, to manipulate things from all different angles to make sure that you don't push something too far one direction, you will push someone out of bounds in another way, and there will be consequences to that. But with Kambo, it seems to really activate this innate intelligence of modulation, where, like we said, it is disruptive and it actually prompts the body to employ its own like feedback regulatory mechanisms to evaluate where things are out of balance so that it can make the adjustments to move things back into balance. So, because of this, people getting very customized, personalized results with this medicine. And I mean, gosh, I have so many stories of just that blow my mind, really, that continue to amaze me. Recently, I had a woman fly from Australia for her stage 4 breast cancer, and she did 5 sessions with me in a 2.5 week period. Nothing like crazy. There was some time in between. And then she went back to Australia and had her checkup with her cancer doctor, and there was no evidence of cancer. And they were trying to insist that they must have misdiagnosed her. And it's like, she's like, I had freaking surgery on my to remove my lymph nodes, and I was stage 4. You misdiagnosed me? So none of the ketogenic diet or the anti-cancerous herbs or the Kambo did anything. So that can be also frustrating for people as they get dismissed the power of these medicines.
Mm.
I had a woman fly from another state. She had Epstein-Barr virus and had been debilitated for, gosh, 6, 8 months. And she came and she did 2 back-to-back days with me, 2 sessions. First day, 1 point. Second day, 2 points. Very low doses. She went into remission and stayed in remission for, God, I don't know, 5 years or whatever. And she had some health stuff come up after that, as anyone would, because health is not permanent, right? We have to continually work at it. But yeah, I have so many amazing stories like that, or people who have not been able to have a bowel movement on their own in 5 years and use an enema every day or colonic every day, and they do Kambo once, and then they have a natural poop the next day, which is like, whoa. So a lot of situations like that where I'm just like, holy cow, this stuff is magic. And there's, of course, there's all the physical effects from the peptides, which are amazing, of course. But there really is a magic to it. There's an intelligence to it. And I do feel that there is this very kind being that is connected and transmissioned, I don't know what the word is, through the chemistry of how this medicine's interacting and interplaying with our physiology. And hands down, what I think that Kambo is the most effective for is illnesses where there is a strong psycho-emotional or psycho-spiritual component to, especially autoimmune conditions, trauma, addiction, pain. I mean, really, so many diseases have this element of trauma and emotional dysregulation and nervous system dysfunction. And it sounds woo, but it's actually, there's plenty of logical scientific explanation. Like, this is actually not that abstract to think about. We know that the stress response in a nervous system has all these downstream physiological cascades that affect digestion, therefore they affect nutrient utilization, food mobilization, microbiome population dynamics, which is going to affect neurology and immunology, immune function. It's going to affect the thymus function and the policing of auto antibodies and T cell. I mean, it all makes sense when you just follow the thread of logic in a scientific way. And what I think conventional medicine is missing when trying to address a lot of these complex illnesses like Lyme disease, like autoimmune conditions, like addiction, like depression, even, is they're missing the importance of the psycho-spiritual element and influence on the physical neurology and what the consequences of that are on the rest of the body, such as the vagal nerve and all the organs that are connected to the nervous system, the enteric nervous system, which is all the neurons that live in our digestive tract, the immune function, etc. So I find Kambo to be very holistic in addressing all of these facets of health simultaneously. And part of that is not just through chemistry or through magic of the spirit of Kambo, if you believe in that, but it's also through ritualistic containers. So I'm a strong proponent of utilizing consciousness medicine in conjunction with these very potent and somewhat spiritual modalities. I think that when we create an intention where we can articulate and know exactly what we desire in our healing process, and then you combine that with this very real physical experience, and maybe there's magic, maybe there's not. I mean, at the least, you are the magic, right? Your consciousness is the magic. And so when you combine these things, you just create this supercharged momentum that creates such a precious opportunity for somebody to change their life and to have their consciousness ripple down into their physiology and shed these layers of somatic related suffering. And I think this is something that is a new adaptation of Kambo. In the traditional jungle context, there's very little ritual around Kambo. It's quite casual, and that's something that we have projected onto their culture in a way that's false. They don't have a lot of that fluff, and they're not even really taking Kambo for their own transpersonal healing experience. They're taking it so they can go hunt a monkey better or go kill their neighboring tribes more efficiently. And this new age use of modern Kambo is more about personalized healing, psychological healing, emotional, energetic healing. That is all newly developed in the last 20 years or so. And so this ritualization and ceremonialization of Kambo is actually completely novel, and it's not traditional. And I personally believe that there's such tremendous benefit to it that we cannot ignore that there is value to innovating in certain modalities and areas of life as we evolve in humanity. And the truth is that this medicine and others have left the jungle. They've left the jungle, and perhaps for a reason, perhaps they chose to. And I don't think it's wrong for these things to evolve and be adapted to the global world that is now involved with them.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And if I'm being completely honest, there's a part of me that understands that the secretion comes from a living organism. And there's this pattern that we've seen play out in our society over and over again of commoditization and taking advantage of natural resources, not honoring the inherent beauty and the inherent goodness of those things and using them in a way that's exploitative. I feel a responsibility to in having these conversations because quite frankly, I've gone back and forth about using Kambo, and I've had mixed feelings about it at different times, seeing its application in different ways and seeing how different practitioners were holding the medicine and administering it and some of their business practices and some of the messaging and the way they talked about it. And I'm really glad that you're able to come on and break it down in a very scientific way and share your experience as far as your belief in how the ceremonial aspect of it and applying our consciousness to the healing process, how much of an impact that can have. As somebody who's deeply in it, do you have, or I'd say, what are your concerns, or do you have any concerns of the environmental impact on how this medicine, specifically Kambo, is gathered, how it's procured? And I'd really love to hear your point of view on it because you've been on the front lines. I've seen your pictures holding the frog and having the frog on your shoulder and just being in their environment with them. And I'd love to hear your take on that. And if you share any such concerns, and just, yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, this is such an important thing that we need to discuss as a Kambo community, is sustainability and respecting the origins of Kambo. And it's very tricky because it's inevitably being popularized and it has spread to the West. That's already happened. There's no stopping that. So the question is, how do we gracefully steward the integration of Kambo in a way that's not going to be severely imbalancing to the frog populations, to indigenous interactions, and be exploitative or extractive. And it's very difficult because there's so many different opinions on what the ideal scenario is. And yeah, I have spent a lot of deep time in the jungle with very close relations with indigenous communities where I have talked with them a lot about what their concerns are, what their desires are, what their pain is, what challenges they're facing, in addition to seeing on the ground the impacts of frogs that are being overharvested. I've seen frogs that show signs of stress because they're being extracted from too frequently, etc. Or when you catch a number of frogs and only half of them even have any secretion to offer, it really impacts you when you see that in person. And that's part of why I'm so passionate about bringing practitioners to the jungle to meet the frog in person and to see the way that it is extracted, because it forms a more personal relationship and understanding with how precious this substance is. And you realize when you watch a Matses scale a 40-foot tree in the middle of the night and risk their safety to catch a frog that doesn't even have any secretion because it's been milked recently, you really treat this medicine differently. You are more conservative with it. You don't want to waste it. And you understand that it's not to be just dished out willy nilly. And if somebody is not serious about really utilizing the opportunity that the medicine's going to give them, it's not worth wasting such a precious and rare substance. So ultimately, I don't know what the answer, the save all is going to be with this medicine. And I think that this is at the forefront of what we as a community need to be addressing immediately. I am seeing this explosion of interest in Kambo, and there's so many people that can benefit from it, that desire it, or that don't even know that it exists yet, that may in the future want to interact with it. And there's just simply not enough of it for everybody that could benefit from it. And My take, which may be an unpopular opinion, but I do think that creating some sort of synthetic alternative is perhaps going to be something that can take pressure off of the actual frogs themselves. I know that there's controversy around this as an idea, but at the end of the day, some people just want healing. They want relief from their Lyme disease, their cancer, their pain, whatever. And they don't necessarily connect to the indigenous or jungle origins of this medicine, and they don't care. Or they actually want a standardized FDA approved compound or formula that they trust has gone through the hoops and regulations that make them feel safe, because some people want to stay in the realm of conventional medicine. That's where they trust guidance from. And I don't think it's wrong to give people additional access to a tool that can help them. So that's personally where I have the most interest in exploring, is like, could we actually receive a gift from Kambo, which would be the inspiration to make a Kambo like drug, not to exploit Kambo, not to bastardize it, but actually to see it as a beautiful offering and gift that comes from the frog, where it's showing us, hey, this is something I can teach you and show you how to help people. And there's a lot of questions about how that could look. And obviously, you get into the pharmaceutical side of things, and there's really shady business practices that are based on kind of exploitation and greed and things like that. So I hope that there is another way that something could go through a standardized drug development process, but also maintain integrity and do something differently. And luckily, I see a little bit of that being modeled in the psychedelic space, where you can have these like B Corps or nonprofits that are pioneering a novel drug into the FDA hoops that you have to jump through to make something accessible and safe. So there's that as a potential, which has a number of different challenges and drawbacks. And there are people that are creating these like frog reserves that are, in essence, like safe places where the frogs can live and reproduce and hopefully be harvested in a respectful way. But it's just really hard to know, one, if these are going to be effective or smart measures to take. And it's also hard to know if the people taking the measures are going to be honorable in how these things are conducted. And even if people start out with good intentions, power and money can pervert people, even with the purest of hearts. So it's really challenging. And as someone who I consider myself a leader in this space, it's like ethical and philosophical questions like this that I reflect on and process very often as I move forward. Even as a scientist, I have to ask myself, where is this information going to end up, and ultimately what's going to be the result of me doing this research, and is it going to be good? And again, going back to this philosophy about there is really no such thing as good and bad in the world, and it's a very Taoist perspective that I have, is there's going to be consequences to any choice, to any action, to any route that something goes, and there will always be beauty and there will always be sacrifice in that. So at the end of the day, that helps me just let go of the reins a little bit, and not feel like it's up to me to control the fates of a medicine or the outcome of something, because at the end of the day, it'll all unfold perfectly as consciousness, the universe chose it to. So I know I'm getting a bit deep and philosophical here, but yeah, it's a tricky subject to address for sure.
Thank you for expressing yourself and sharing your feelings about that. I have to be honest, as you were talking about the frog and initially when you were starting to get into it, I had some emotions come up and my eyes teared up. I thought about some of the Kambo treatments that I've had and my interactions with this medicine, and how really, truly grateful I am for this medicine being in my life. It's helped me through some challenging times. There's not any specific disorder or physical malady that I had other than COVID that was specifically that I took Kambo for, which for me I just had an intuition like I need to do Kambo to help with the brain fog and things. And that was pretty much the only thing I did. And it took a while, but that was what I used. And man, I have such a deep gratitude and love and appreciation for this medicine. And just the fact that you're right, it came from the jungle. By whatever magical way that it got here, it's here. And now that it's here, it's like the cat's out of the bag. It's not going to go back to the jungle. We can't act as if we don't know that it's here. People are having more and more access to it. We really have to address all of the situations and the implications of what it means to be, as you say, good stewards of this medicine and being responsible for this very precious resource and using it in a way that's conservative and not being exploitative of it, just really having respect for it. And I really appreciate the fact that you're bringing people to the jungle to do the trainings and to have practitioners connect with it in its own environment. That for me just struck a chord. That's got to be such a different kind of relationship with that medicine than somebody who's a practitioner and has never been there or just hasn't had that experience. It has to have some sort of effect on how a person administers the medicine and practice using Kambo and administering it. So I want to acknowledge you for that. And yeah, I appreciate the work that you're doing and the intentionality that you're putting into your practice and your trainings and all that you do and the depth of thinking. And I appreciate the fact that you go to that place, to the depth with it. Yeah, on some level, there is no good or bad. This is just a grand play that's being orchestrated by some consciousness. We're all a part of it. We're all individual parts of this greater consciousness. And we may not be aware of why things are happening, but it is also my belief that nothing is an accident. Everything happens for a reason. I am not aware of why a lot of things are happening. If anything, I'm aware of just such a tiny fraction of all that's going on and everything that's happening in the wider context of the world and the universe and the different dimensions. Who knows who's pulling the strings, causing what to happen when it's happening. And I trust that it's all happening for a reason and that there is a divine intelligence and will behind this medicine being here. And you talking about taking ownership and responsibility and having these conversations that brought honestly, a lot of peace to my heart. This is a conversation I've been wanting to have for a long time. And I've had it a little bit here and there with certain people and it's fallen on deaf ears. And I had a very heart opening moment as you were speaking. That's probably the best way to put it, because almost this feeling of relief, like, okay, somebody gets it. Somebody else is seeing, and I know you're not the only one. There's a lot of very wise people who are doing this work. I was like, hearing you say that, somebody coming from a position of what I would consider an authority, a subject matter expert, somebody who walks the walk, like that brought a lot of relief to me because I do have that deep love for the Kambo medicine. Like, oh, it's going to be okay. Yeah, everything's going to be fine. There's good people out there doing good things. It'll all be all right. So a little
Yeah.
bit of a tangent, but that was just present with me. And I felt like it was something that I had to share.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, it is important because I find, and I've been guilty of this myself, where it's so easy to just disassociate from where the medicine comes from. And people do this with their food all the time, like where they're eating their burger or whatever, and they're not thinking about like the animal it came from or the process that it went through or any of that, and feeling gratitude for that. And I don't think that a practitioner has to go to the jungle in order to be a good provider, but I do think that it is really necessary to fully understand the scope of what you're dealing with. And I think it is of highest integrity to meet that medicine in its origins and to connect and give back to the people that have pioneered that technology and continue to be guardians of the jungle where it lives. And I see people who tout themselves as master practitioners who have never taken the time to bother to go to the jungle and connect with this frog directly. And I do have some feelings about that, and I didn't used to, but now that I've had such deep experience interacting with the frog in real life, I understand now how important that is, and it makes it more real for you to see that this is a living, breathing animal with a nervous system that experiences pain and experiences fear and some other emotions or sentience that an animal with a nervous system and brain can experience. And it just really puts it all in perspective. And it's important to fully understand what it is that you are dealing with and interacting with at the end of the day, because it's so easy to sit in our comfortable apartments with our sage and our little altars and stuff and just be slanging Kambo 7 days a week and to not really appreciate what went in, what was sacrificed by others to bring that experience to somebody.
Wow. Yeah, and as we start to wrap this up, we've been talking about a lot of the benefits of Cambo and the experience of it and how it can impact someone's nervous system and their health and their life. And for people who are in a place where they're maybe interested, maybe they've feeling some sort of internal calling, maybe they've heard about it before and are interested and want to know more about it. What are some resources that are available for people who want to learn more about it? Or if someone's interested in potentially working with Kambo or trying to talk to a practitioner and get more information, how would you go about, or what would your advice be for somebody who's interested in working with this medicine on how to choose a practitioner and how to start? If that is someone's interest and they're feeling that call, what are the steps that could be taken to ensure that they're working with somebody that's reputable or has good practices or someone they can trust? I don't know if there's some sort of directory, or how would you vet a practitioner?
Yeah, so I have actually made a number of resources in an attempt to support people in this way. So I have a few different websites that can provide some information that would be relevant. On my medicinefrogcombo.com website, I actually do have an article about how to choose and vet a practitioner and what key questions you can ask them. But just in summary, for the sake of explaining it here, you should ask them, where did they receive their training? What safety protocols do they have in place, especially when it comes to drinking water, fainting protocols? Do they do a medical screening? If they don't, run. Everybody should be doing a simple medical screening. Do they do test points on first timers? Have they been to the jungle? Have they worked with indigenous communities? I find it's actually ideal for someone to have received Western training and met the frog in person in the jungle. So not everyone is at a place where they have done that, but to be honest, I find that jungle only training is not really sufficient or appropriate for working on people with modern ailments in the Western context. So that article has a number of different questions and things that you can consider when deciding if a practitioner is a good choice for you, because it's Wild West. There's a lot of self-proclaimed Kambo shamans out there, which is not a real thing, by the way. So you do have to be very discerning and know that there is actually a tremendous amount of options. So don't think that's the only person in your area. There's probably more. You just have to keep searching. I actually do have a directory site called combofinder.com. Right now, the website is more or less dysfunctional, so I apologize for that. In the next month or two, it's going to be rebuilt completely. So maybe by the time this podcast is out, it'll be up and running. So apologies for that. But when the time is right and you want to find a practitioner in your area, I have a couple hundred practitioners listed on that site. And if anybody is a practitioner and listening and you want to be on that site, you can make a listing for free. And then people can connect to practitioners all around the world, find them in their area, and they can also read reviews that people have left about that practitioner. They can filter based on experience level or cost or training type or specialties and things like that. I also have a number of training courses. I do in person practitioner training if somebody is called to be a practitioner and they've already developed a relationship with Kambo. And then I have online courses that are usually specialty or advanced courses for existing practitioners. I have advanced apprenticeship coaching programs, the Lyme and autoimmune specialty training for practitioners. And then more recently, I did add a self administration course. So if you have worked with a practitioner and you are feeling like you want to have a deeper relationship with Kambo with a self administration practice, I have a course that we do your self administrations live on Zoom, supervised with somebody in person as well to make sure that you're safe. So there's a lot of options for education on my various websites. So there's medicinefrogkambo.com, there's kambofinder.com, and then there's kambospecialist.com. And I'm sure those will end up in the show notes so people can check them out. But I also have a vault of scientific resources. I have links to papers that I've published and some information on the research I'm doing. So if you just poke around, you're going to find all sorts of little fun surprises where you can learn a thing or two about this medicine.
Super cool. Wow. I was unaware that you had such an extensive developed library of resources for people, and I find that super inspiring. So thank you for all the work that you're doing and how you're trying to support people and how you are supporting people through your trainings, your wisdom, and the knowledge that you very openly shared with us today. That was amazing. You are awesome. Thank you so much for your time. This has been an absolute pleasure. I'm super grateful to have had this conversation with you and to be able to be in the space and to connect with a like-minded individual who I can tell has a deep love and a true understanding and such a deep care for the medicine. It's really an honor to connect with you in this context, and I appreciate you coming on, and I have a feeling this won't be the last conversation we have. So
Yeah, thank you
thank you.
so much for the invitation. And I think these conversations are so important. So I really cherish the opportunity that you created for us to connect and share this information. So thank you so much, Ian.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Caitlin. And all of Caitlin's information will be in the show notes. So until next time, take care and be well.